Welcome to this instruction video by Squat Revolution. Today we will go through the Romanian deadlift, or as some people like to call it, the half-range deadlift. The most important thing when doing Romanian deadlift is to work from the hip. The movements start from the hip and it finish with the hips. So it's important that you have a proper hip hinge and that you're really sitting back with your hip, so that it's your hip that is doing the movement, that is controlling the angle of the upper body. Because if you let the lower back control the movement, then all you're going to get is a rounded back, and you're going to create a lot of impact and a lot of stress onto the spine. Because you can see a lot of people when they are doing the Romanian deadlift that they tend to only bend with their back and keep their hips quite still, but that is just going to create a lot of stress onto the spine, and a lot of back problems is also coming because of that. So you really want to get the hips to control the movements, so that you stand around hip width apart, toes pointing forward. You maintain a proud posture in your upper body, and then you hip hinge, and then you're really sitting back, lengthening your hamstring. You want to keep your knees quite soft, so that you don't want them to be stiff, but you also don't want them to go forward. It's not a squat. So you want to keep them soft, but the knees does not go forward, meaning that the knees are only bending by the hips. They're not bending from the ankles. So you engage your core, you maintain that proud posture, and then you hip hinge and really reaches back until you can feel a slight stretch in your hamstring, and then you go back up. But it's your hip that controls the movement. The upper body just follows the angle and the position of the hips. Okay? A good way to know if you're bending from the hips or your lower back is if you grab the skin just next to your spine, and then you put your hand right in front of you, and then you do that movement. You let your hip go back and forward. And if you can keep that pinch exactly the same the entire time, then you know that you are working properly with your hips and that you're not bending from your lower back. Because if you will lose that pinch, that will mean that you're bending more from your lower back rather than with your hips. So it's important that you really involve your hips and let the hip control the movement. So if we are going to take this kettlebell and we stand hip width apart, we engage our core, we have a proud upper body posture, and then you let the hip go back until your hands are just below the knees, and then you go back up. Hips go back and forward, back and forward. And then another good way to protect your spine is to, before you start the movement, no matter if you're doing it with body weights or if you're using a kettlebell or a dumbbell or a barbell, is that you also squeeze your shoulder blades tight together, like you want to cross a nut in between your shoulder blades, so that you're really squeezing them together. That's also a good way to maintain that straight spine and let the hip do all the work. But you want the hip to start the movement and to end the movement, so that you can stay centered. Because if you're bending from your lower back, you're also going to shift the weight forward. because the weight is going to go over your toes, and that's just going to create even more stress onto your spine if it is that you're using a weight. Then if you're just bending from your lower back, that weight is going to be shifted forward, and all the weight is going to be put on your spine instead of your hips. But if you're bending from your hips and you do this properly, then you can stay more centered and you can involve more muscles into the movement, and also by that get better results and be able to enjoy this movement a lot better. So make sure that the movement comes from the hips. The hip goes back, it reaches back like you want to touch the wall behind you, and then you go forward. You reach back, get that length in the hamstring, and go forward. Hips. Remember the hips when you do this. Good.